And we're live. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm great.
Thanks for being here, man. I really appreciate it.
It is the coolest thing I've done.
Really? Ever?
Yeah. Well, you know, I can't remember that far back, but it's pretty cool.
I watched your TED Talk on, what was the word that you used? Lesterland?
Lesterland.
Yeah. And it felt hopeless. Like, for people who don't know what I'm talking about, could you just give like a brief synopsis of the way you were describing how completely rigged our election system is, and what it actually takes to be elected, and how much of the time they spend is involved in raising money and why?
Yeah, so we've got a system where we have a money primary and then we have a regular election. And in the money primary, to compete, you got to raise tons of money to be able to fund your campaign. And when you raise that money, you raise it from a tiny, tiny fraction of the 1%. So in the TED Talk about Lesterland, I said, you know, imagine a place called Lesterland, where basically it's the Lesters who rule. And by the Lesters, I mean the same proportion of people named Lester as in the United States right now. So there's about 150,000 Americans named Lester. I'm one of them. But here we are, the Lesters. So imagine a world ruled by Lesterland. Because that's essentially the world we have because of the way we fund our campaigns. Because there's about 150,000 men who give even just the maximum contribution to one political candidate. If you ask the number of people who give the maximum contribution over the course of a campaign, meaning in the primary and the general election, it's about 22,000 Americans in 2014 who gave the maximum contribution to one political campaign. So what that means is it's a tiny, tiny fraction who are the most important funders of political campaigns. And candidates for Congress and members of Congress spend 30 to 70% of their time sucking up to this tiny, tiny fraction. And so is it any surprise that you see Congress bending over backwards to keep those guys happy? Because they know without those people, they don't have a shot at getting back into Congress.
And the way you were describing it, as when you were saying it as Lesterland, it was like, imagine if we were this screwed up. That was essentially what you were saying.
Yeah.
But we're more screwed up than Lesterland.
Yeah, we're more screwed
That was
up.
a disturbing video, because I was realizing, it was emerging as you were speaking. I was like, wait a minute. Is it that bad?
Yeah. You know, I actually, since that video, have come to think it's even worse.
So
right? Because,
like Clarence Land?
Well, it could be worse because it's even a smaller number. And if you look at the number of super PAC donors, you know, the really critical super PAC donors, about 100 people who gave more than half of the super PAC money in the last presidential election. You know,
100.
So 100. You know, so this is a really tiny, tiny number. But what this tiny number represents in the way we fund campaigns is the extraordinary inequality on that dimension, right? But since I was focused on the money, I've, you know, more recently started thinking about the other screwed up dimensions. So think about gerrymandering. You know, we gerrymander districts in America so that about 85% of the House seats in the United States Congress are safe seats, which means if you're a Republican in a safe seat Democratic district, your views just never matter to the congressperson, because that vote of a Republican will never determine who's in Congress. Or a Democrat in a safe seat Republican district, that's the same. Okay, but that doesn't mean those congresspeople are not afraid about re-election. Of course, they are afraid about whether they'll be reelected, but they're afraid not of a Democrat running against a Republican. They're afraid of an even more extreme Republican running against the incumbent Republican. So what those incumbents in those safe seat districts do is they obsess about what the extremist in their own party cares about. So the extremists on the left and the right have this ability to leverage extraordinary influence inside of the House of Representatives simply because we've decided to gerrymander these districts to create these safe seats. So those extremists are a kind of Lesters too. There are more of them. You know, it's more democratic than Lesterland. But they too have enormous influence over ordinary people, and most ordinary people's views then to these Congress people just don't matter.
That feels hopeless for a dummy like me sitting on the outside looking at this. I'm like, God, if this is this deeply entrenched with, I guess it's not technically corruption because it's all legal,
right?
But it's an entanglement with money and with influence that, how do you unwind this?
Yeah. So that point is really critical. It's not technically illegal. And what that means is the people who are engaged in this are not doing wrong things. They're just playing by the rules.
Right.
They're playing with the system. It's just that the system has become corrupted.
When did it start?
Well, I think that the moment the United States Congress begins to fall apart in a really dramatic and interesting way is when Newt Gingrich becomes Speaker of the House. So when the Republicans take control of Congress in 95, it's the first time the Republicans have taken control of the House of Representatives in 40 years. So the House becomes incredibly competitive. Each election, is up for grabs. Who's going to control the House? So Gingrich turns his members in the House into perpetual fundraisers. It's basically, we got to raise the money to defend ourselves the next time around. And then the Democrats followed suit. So the Democrats turned their members into perpetual fundraisers. And they changed the rules about who gets to be chairman of committees. It's no longer who's the person with the most experience or the most insight. Increasingly becomes who raises the most money. And the Democratic Party, I know about the Democratic Party, the Republicans don't talk to me much, but the Democratic Party increasingly changes its focus from what are the policies that our members care about to what are we going to do to make sure that you as a member meet your fundraising target? And so from 95 until today, the institution becomes an institution focused on the game of getting reelected. Jim Cooper, a Democrat from Tennessee who went to Congress first in 1983, so he's been there for a long time. Cooper says Capitol Hill has become a kind of farm league for K Street. Okay, so what he means by that is members go there, they learn how to raise money, they become focused obsessively on raising money. But one of the things that they're really focused on is how do they go from Capitol Hill to becoming a lobbyist? Because that's where the real money is. A member of Congress gets paid about as much as the students I educate at the Harvard Law School in their first year as lawyers. So to ordinary Americans, it's a lot of money, but to people on Capitol Hill, it doesn't seem like a lot of money. But then they go and become a lobbyist. They can make 10 times that as a lobbyist. And so what Cooper says is you have this institution which has become so focused on the money that it's just an institution for producing influence that can be sold. And first the congressmen are basically sucking up to the people who want to buy influence. And then the congressmen become the people buying influence themselves because they're working as lobbyists for these important interests.
Whew. So they're in the rig game. They understand how it gets rigged, and then they work to rig it.
Yeah. Yeah. They see this as their business plan.
And it's their honeypot.
Yeah.